Kia ora and welcome to Context. I'm Corin, Dann.
And I'm Guyon, Espiner.
Now, context is the backstory, the history to the front page stories that are making news today. So it provides a bit of that, the backstory, if you like.
But there's a catch, isn't there, Corin?
Yeah, there is a catch. Only one of us, and it's me this week, knows what the topic is and has done the research.
That's right.
And let me tell you,
Guyon, I've been looking forward to what you've got for me. Whether you're going to take revenge on me with a strange niche
I think
subject.
you'll like this one. I think there's speaking of long shadows, I just think this one is about as long as it gets for New Zealand, and we are looking at the politics of the pension. We are looking at superannuation today.
Great.
And the reason why we are looking at superannuation is because this guy, a certain Mr. Winston Peters, said this at his recent conference.
KiwiSaver is going to be reformed. KiwiSaver will become compulsory. Both the employee and the employer contributions will be increased to at least 8% first, then later to 10%. But here's the difference. KiwiSavers and employers will receive tax cuts to cover the increases.
So you would be well aware, Guyon, that this has been something that Mr. Peters has been a fan of for a long time, hasn't he?
Oh, well, that's right. And I think it was 1998, might have been 1999, where he put... No, it was 98. I'll take a punt on that. Where he put a compulsory super referendum to the country and lost.
Oh, yeah, he lost. We'll talk about that.
It was in the 80 or 90%. So he was voted down on that. But yeah,
maybe his time's come.
Yeah,
maybe his time's come.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things about that, just before I move on, is that it's being talked about now because, of course, Australia does have that compulsory system with 12%. And if you look at our voluntary system, which we've got as KiwiSaver, ours is about 120 odd billion. Any guesses to what Australia's is racked up to?
I would estimate over 2 trillion.
And counting.
Yeah. What is it?
I found a figure of 4.2 trillion.
Is that right?
And
yeah.
They're pushing it up to 12% contribution.
Yeah.
So
it's
a
amazing,
lot of people, I guess, look enviously, don't they, at that Australian system, and they say...
Yeah. A lot of serious
money.
people say that is the major difference between the two economies and how much better they are doing. The depth of their capital markets and the fact that they've saved more of their own money, can control more of their own assets. So, yeah, it's and I'm sure you'll get to this too, but we could have been in a similar position if it wasn't for some certain politicians in the mid-70s.
Massive sliding doors moment for New Zealand, eh?
Yeah,
Massive.
Absolutely.
It really is. The other thing that also came up, and the other reason why I had a crack at this is because we do have in this country, and this isn't new, this is the whole thing. We've got this bulge in the population. We've known for so long that the baby boomers, as they retired, so many of them, that we were going to struggle to pay. There simply wasn't going to be enough workers to pay for people who have retired. So let's just have a little listen. This has also come up because Treasury put out their long-term fiscal update just a week or so back.
Treasury has warned the retirement age and GST would need to gradually increase over the next 40 years to solve New Zealand's fiscal challenges. In its long-term fiscal forecast, it says the pension age would need to rise to 72 by 2065 and GST to 32% by the same year.
Yeah, so you would have covered a couple of those, wouldn't you, over your time?
Yeah, they're pretty useful documents, aren't they? And when Treasury does this long-term fiscal planning, and you think, oh, gee, this is the consequences if we don't act now. And I can't see a lot of appetite for people wanting to pay 32% GST. Can you?
You know, the key stat that people need to get in their heads here is that. This is straight from there. It says, in the 60s there were 7 New Zealanders aged 15 to 64 for every Kiwi aged over 65. So you had 7 for every one pensioner. Now there are 4, and it's projected in 2065 there'll be 2, supporting every pensioner, and that's obviously not sustainable.
And that's due to demographic collapse too, and the birth rates. I think we're down to about 1.6, aren't we? Where obviously you'd need 2.1 births per woman to replace the population. So that's a factor there too. The demographics are changing, and it's incredibly challenging, isn't it, to support that?
It is. It's really interesting because the Retirement Commissioner, for one, is someone who doesn't actually support raising the age. There are people out there who argue that, whilst there's some who argue, it's completely unsustainable what we've got with super and the age has got to rise and we've got to do something, and that's been an argument for so long. There are those who argue that actually, we are at about 5% of GDP. I
was going to say, it's around there, isn't it?
OECD is like 10% the average pension for a lot of countries in the OECD. So it's like, but I think what Treasury was kind of saying was that it was quite timid, but they were basically saying, you've just got to do something, start something now. Just start taking the steps towards it. You don't have to do it right now, but you're going to have to.
That's the thing, and it was the policy of the outgoing Bill English government, wasn't it, that he lost in 2017 to Jacinda Ardern, but the National Party's policy then was to raise it to 67, and you do it gradually, and you do it a month a year or whatever the target is, and you let people know. I guess that, and I'm pretty comfortable with that, but then I'm what's called a knowledge worker now. I might get booted out by AI at some point. But it's the hard thing isn't it, is for people who use their bodies and their hands for work. And, you don't particularly want to be, clambering across roofs at 66 years old.
No, and you've got to deal with you've got the issue of Māori and Pacifica who tend to die earlier. Just we know that for a fact. And then so there's equity issues there that are going to have to be addressed. I think National White will have another go at it. What do you think? I think that Werka Willis has signalled that as a party, not as a government policy,
I would say so, yeah.
That they might have another crack.
Any government that involves Winston Peters is never going to get that across the line, and that's just the reality. But they may well go into the election, the 2026 election, with that as a policy. Wouldn't be surprised. And ACT would obviously support that too, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, this is part of the theme that I want to... It's just the politics of this thing. I don't think there's a bigger political football in New Zealand than super, and maybe capital gains tax is the only other one. What do you call it? Third rail issue, Is that the term?
It means that if you touch it, you die.
Basically.
The political suicide thing. And we have seen, I'm sure you'll go through some of them. But, once you try to means test it, the surcharge, no ifs, no buts, no maybes, Jim Bolger, many other politicians have run foul of this. And, and Jenny Shipley herself reducing the floor of superannuation in the late 90s. In other words, what it would be set at. Do you have a floor?
Yeah, well, they honestly, in trying to research this, looking at all the attempts during the 90s to muck around with floors and ceilings all the rest of it. Oh, my God.
I'm into this.
Let's go back and have a little... Let's have a look. Where did it all start? Okay, so let's start with the Seddon government. They brought in... There'd been some talk about retirement sort of compulsory savings schemes, private savings schemes. But the Seddon government came up with the Old Age Pension Act. It was from general taxation, which is significant. It wasn't a private sort of scheme or a KiwiSaver type scheme. It was from general taxation, and despite the fact that a lot of people felt that old people, it was charity, you shouldn't be giving money to old people, they should be looking after themselves, they came up with this pension. It only covered about a third of the average wage. Let's just have a little listen to the preamble of the bill.
Whereas it is equitable that deserving persons who, during the prime of their life, have helped to bear the public burdens of this colony by the payment of taxes and to open up its resources by their labour and skill, should receive from the colony a pension in their old age.
So there you go. We were actually one of the first. I think Germany had a go at it, but that was probably the first from general taxation. Now, I've got a couple of questions for you. How universal do you think this was in terms of who was included? Any guesses? Any guesses for who might have been excluded?
Well, the usual groups, probably women. I don't know.
Well, no, women were in.
Oh, they were
women were in. Yep.
People who didn't own land, probably.
No, so this is where it gets complicated. The one group that was just completely cut out were Asian New Zealanders who happened to be here. They got a totally horrific treatment as early New Zealanders. I think we did apologise eventually.
We had the poll tax, didn't we?
Yeah. No, they went in. They just weren't there. Now Māori were there and they weren't. They were there, but there was a means test on this. So means tests, from what I can see, means tests were actually pretty normal. Yeah. So there was a means test on this thing, right? And so your land and your holdings and your income and all that sort of stuff was tested. Māori, of course, it was deemed if you had ancestral lands, then of course you were cut out of it. So it meant that obviously not as many Māori as should have perhaps got it. But here's the real kicker. So they could get it, but they often got a lower amount, and they had difficulty because you had to go to a magistrate to prove that you were eligible for the pension. You believe that? You had to go, and it was a public hearing.
Really?
So, and you had a moral test. Yeah.
Wow.
This is everyone. This is not just Māori who had to go to a magistrate to get it, because you had to prove that you obviously the means test that you didn't have these assets, but you also had to prove you were good character, and that you were sober for at least 5 years.
Is that right?
And of course, one of the problems for Māori too was that they often were difficult to prove their age. So they had difficulties giving birth certificates and proving that they were of the right age, because it started at 65.
Oh, was it 65?
Yes, it was. I think I'm pretty sure it was 65. I'd have to double check that. Yeah. So it was, but it was a pension, and Seddon got a lot of criticism for it. From what I can see, people thought it was socialism. They thought that's not the job of the government to be doing that for. But he was quite concerned about a lot of single men, a lot of old gold miners and stuff. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. And then so we had a pension. We had an old age pension, and then, of course, it got boosted, I think, or sort of turbocharged when this government came along. Let's have a listen to the next piece of audio.
The opposition leader, the Honourable Adam Hamilton, has stated that his party will not cut pensions. His statement has no meaning at all, for the simple reason that he cannot avoid cutting pensions and free benefits. The destruction of the Social Security Act by the Nationalists, if returned, will immediately inflict loss on all pensioners and recipients of benefits. Old people will be deprived of 7 and 6 a week. Instead of getting 30 shillings a week, as from the beginning of April next, they would be given 22 and 6 a week.
Any guesses who that might be?
Is that savage? Or is
yes, it is. It is. It was a bit hard to find the audio that I was looking for.
It's amazing that we've got audio back of Savage. That's great.
It is. Well, he was so
he was instrumental in the welfare state too, wasn't he? And
he was the cradle. So his
cradle to grave, 1935 was it? The
yes.
Savage government came in. Yeah.
Yep. So he, from what I could see, he significantly boosted the old age pension as it was. He did a bunch. Made it easier for. Got rid of Asians were included. They called them Asiatic. Just crazy stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was such a strange, hard to understand, isn't it? And they removed the asset testing from Māori land, which was clearly unfair. So it became a lot easier to get. They also set up a 2-tiered system, which I found quite interesting too. So they had the old age pension, which was the existing one. That was means tested, and that was for really people who had nothing. And then they also brought in a universal superannuation for everyone that wasn't means tested, but it was quite low. It was just £10. So they had this 2-tiered system, and they raised taxes by 5% to pay for all of this on earnings, which I suppose is not an insignificant amount. All right. I think that's enough of the old history on super, because I think we want to get to the exciting stuff, don't we? And okay, so put yourself in the 70s in New Zealand. Bill Rowling is the Prime Minister. He comes up with, you can tell it, you're nodding, you know what he comes up with. He comes up with a compulsory savings scheme, which is very similar to what Australia's got now, passes it into law, and then it gets nuked by somebody. Let's have a listen to the election advert that put that to bed in the 1975 election.
Shortly, Labour will be taking millions out of our pay packets each week and spending it. In just 7 years, they'll have enough money to buy every share in every public company in New Zealand. Soon, they could buy all the farms. Indeed, one day, the government could wind up owning literally everything. And you know what that's called, don't you?
Isn't that great? That wasn't that known as the dancing Cossacks? Because you can't see that if you're listening on audio alone. But they had Cossacks dancing across with the obvious references to communism and the Bolsheviks.
And it was made by Hanna-Barbera. Is that Hanna-Barbera? Is that how you say it? It's the very famous cartoon company, which must have cost them a lot of money back in the day.
but extremely effective. And Muldoon, of course, won that election and then cancelled the thing, didn't he? From memory, he cancelled it by press release, and I think there was some sort of court case over it. But regardless, I mean, he canned it, didn't he?
He sure did. I mean, as you say, sliding doors moment. Isn't that extraordinary, the way that... So in that ad, they basically were arguing that it was communism. And let's be clear that there was in the 70s, we're still in a Cold War environment. And, there's a lot of fear and, talk about communism and the threat of communism, all sort of stuff. But this idea that if we had this giant pool of funds and a Kiwi, all of our money, that the government is somehow going to buy all the companies in New Zealand and therefore it'll be communism?
Yeah, it's bizarre and an unhinged idea. Obviously praying to those fears, as you say. Vietnam War in full swing. It was a little bit after that, I suppose. But that fear of communism and the Cold War definitely at play. So playing into those fears. But yeah, an unhinged argument, really.
Yeah. Hey, let's have a listen, because what Muldoon actually came up with, which is basically the superannuation scheme we have today, was arguably also as problematic for politics and this country, because he came up with a gold-plated scheme that people, and once you give people something, of course, it's very hard to take it away. His was, of course, he proposed in that campaign that he would replace it with national superannuation, eligibility starting at 60. A superannuation couple received 80% of the average wage. Now, at the moment, it's 66%. And it was considered the most generous scheme in the world anywhere. And you can imagine people got quite attached to that. But let's have a listen to him arguing for this scheme.
Here's what national superannuation will mean to you. If you're a housewife, you'll receive as much as, say, a working man receives. If you're a superannuitant, you'll receive national superannuation in addition to your current superannuation without a means test. If you're an age pensioner, you'll in effect receive around a 30% increase in your pension without a means test.
It's amazing, isn't it? That promise and that... Basically, from what my research suggests, for the next 20 or 30 years, every government, red or blue or whoever else, was trying to roll out of that, to trying to get out of it. They couldn't afford it.
The fiscal cost of it is extraordinary, isn't it? So that was 60. I think, would it have been the Bolger government of the 90s that increased it to 65? Because,
yes. And they did that reasonably well, to be honest. Like, it was a reasonably quick phase in, about 10 years or so. It went, and without too much, from what I can see, too much angst. But there are some, and I'll be interested to know what you think of this, there are some who think, this whole period of the Labour proposal and then Muldoon coming in with super was one of the biggest mistakes this country has ever made. There are those certainly who make that case that... because they look at Australia and they see so Australia has obviously compulsory super scheme as well as a pension, but that because they've got that compulsory super scheme with a means tested pension, they don't have the same burden on with the bulging population, and they've got this big pool of capital which they can invest in and fly around. So there are, I don't know. I mean, a lot of angst, that policy being so generous. But I don't know. But in saying that, let's actually be fair here. Do you think there's some good things about super? I mean, there's some equity issues there that are good, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing that comes to mind first is that rates of poverty for older people, when you look at UN reports and other international comparisons, New Zealand's done incredibly well in that regard. And I know this is an argument that's been brought up that we don't look after people at the other end. The child poverty rates have been pretty bad, and international comparisons have not looked on us that favourably, whereas rates of poverty for older New Zealanders have been, pretty good in terms of international comparisons. So I guess that's the main one, right?
I think so, and you heard Muldoon say there rightly. I mean, there'll be women, there'll be others who just simply wouldn't have been able to save enough, who would have been disadvantaged by more of a compulsory saving scheme, although I'm sure there would have been some mechanism of topping people up to make it more equitable over the long term. You'd have to have the two-tier system, seems like the only way you can go. But what surprises me, of course, was that there was no means testing. And it does seem like means testing is a term, again, that is third rail in this country.
Yeah, well, famously, Jim Bolger was going to get rid of this surcharge, wasn't he? And
he was.
No ifs, no buts, no maybes. And then when they got in the 90s, BNZ collapse, of course, real problems, had recession, mother of all budgets and all that sort of thing. And so he had to sort of U-turn on that, which was controversial. I mean, this bedeviled National right through that period of the 1990s, because indeed when in late 1997 Jenny Shipley took over as Prime Minister, and they had the Asian economic crisis in the late 90s, and she had to felt that she had to fiddle with the pension as well, and they dropped what's called the floor of superannuation. You were talking before about how you set it. It's currently 66% of the average after average wage, if you like.
Yep.
They set a metric for it. Now Jenny Shipley lowered that from memory to 60% of the average wage, along with a mini budget where they sold Contact Energy and cut $1 billion from government spending. So they felt they had to do all that sort of stuff. So, and that was controversial as well. Labor raised it back up to 65% of the average wage, and any government that Winston Peters has been part of has to keep it there as well.
I knew when we got to the 90s you were going to be a mastermind on this stuff. This is good. This is perfect. So, because I think that let's talk about the no ifs, no buts, no maybes, and then because I think the surcharge is a really important thing in New Zealand political history. Let's first of all hear. So you've articulated this quite well. That was he acknowledges he said that. They campaigned to get rid of the surcharge, and then let's just explain what the surcharge is. So really it's means testing, but it was a tax on your other income. It was basically Labor, Roger Douglas in the 85, I think it was, trying to come up with a way to claw back this gold-plated super scheme, but not call it means testing. So you could argue it was a bit of political sort of, spin to try and make it, but they brought in the surcharge in 85. Bolger goes into the 90 election promising no ifs, no buts, no maybes. It's gone, and of course, and you got age, you got grey power, and you've got all these emerging superannuitant groups that are getting in on this. Let's have a listen to him actually defending the decision to increase the surcharge, which is what he did, not scrap it.
Okay.
Let's have a listen to Jim Bolger being grilled on this by Paul Holmes in 93, because he reneged on that promise.
Can I have a look at how treacherous it must seem to many superannuitants your policies were? As soon as you got... Now, please listen to this. When you got elected, you imposed a freeze on super in the 1990 package, the December package. In the mother of all budgets, halfway through 91, you attempted to claw back 60 cents of every dollar of extra income over $80. Finally, later in 91, you settled on a tougher surcharge than Labor, despite the assurances the surcharge would go. Why should anybody regard any statement you make tonight with anything but cynicism?
Well, can I say that when you're going to take off the surcharge, Paul, you have to, of course, have money. And if Labor spent the lot, you can't do it.
That's amazing, eh?
Good old Paul Holmes. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Paul Holmes was amazing.
Yeah, it was great.
I was watching him and listening him back. He was really good.
So is that the 1993 leaders debate? Is it? Or,
yep, it was.
Yeah.
Yep, and they were giving each other death on that. Now, that I think, and I'm going to get you to talk about this because you talked to Bolger in your Ninth Floor series about this. I just think that broken promise was such a big broken promise that I think that sent shockwaves through governments for years, because politicians, you might even draw a bow to say you got MMP or contributed because people were so betrayed by that. But he then, of course, argued he had to. Let's have a listen to you talking to him a few years back for the Ninth Floor about that no ifs, no buts, no maybes.
I sleep comfortably on that because I know it was absolutely the right thing to do.
That was a big hit on your credibility that you took
Absolutely.
personally, because you had said no ifs,
Correct.
no buts, no maybes.
Absolutely. There was no equivocation on that. But that was the right thing to do, rather than giving money to those who could survive quite well without it. Well, you're taking it from those who were struggling. Couldn't justify that if you're talking about a fair and equitable society. And those retirees who sort of never forgave me, well, I'm sorry, but we have to deal with the cards we're dealt with, and clearly the cards we're dealt with on election day or the day after the election in 1990 were vastly different than the cards that were allegedly on the table the day before.
I mean, it's interesting listening back to that. To be fair to Jim Bolger and the incoming 1990 government, we didn't have the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which Ruth Richardson, as Finance Minister, I'm pretty sure, brought in until she was rolled in 1993. And you know how, and people listening to this will hear it still today, where the government comes in and says, oh, well, we didn't realise how bad things were. Nowadays, I think that that's pretty much bullshit. I mean, it's rubbish in that governments do, and the public, if they want to, can look at the Crown accounts month to month, and it's pretty detailed. It's pretty good. And you have
There's a pre-election update. They have to give a pre-election update.
Yeah, you have all those things. And the transparency in the New Zealand system is very, very good internationally. But back then, you didn't have that. And the big hit they took was the BNZ. You know, I mean, that was government owned at the time. It was basically bankrupt, and they had fiscal conditions a hell of a lot worse than they had thought. That David Cagle, who was the outgoing Labour finance minister who took over after Roger Douglas, I mean, had left conditions which they felt that they'd been ambushed on. So there is a certain degree of truth in that. But your major point of broken promises, yes, led to deep cynicism in New Zealand, and was, as people have listened to the show we did on MMP, one of the major factors that probably led to that electoral system. So yeah, it had big implications.
Yes, indeed. And the politicians, of course, you know, they were getting it in the neck because of that, and neither side wanted to deal with the problem. So they came up with something which I think is pretty interesting. They had this thing, the Todd Task Force, an independent inquiry into superannuation, and then they came up with an accord.
They did. They had
I'd forgotten about.
Yeah, no, they had a superannuation accord, which was supposedly a bilateral or a multi-party accord that you signed up to. Yeah, that's right.
1993, political accord on superannuation, and it basically agreed that there'd be no means testing, it would be universal entitlement from age 65, adjusted to living standards relative to wages. It was mutually...
Yeah, it's mutually short destruction, effectively,
yeah.
But so was the first breach of that considered the Shipley move to reduce the floor of superannuation down, you'll know this, but down to 60%, I'm pretty sure.
I think so, although what I picked up was the fatal flaw in the accord, which was a certain Winston Peters did not sign up to it.
Okay, right, okay.
It always goes back to this.
Yeah, well, that's
so
right.
He didn't sign up to it.
Yeah.
And that's when things started fraying. I think I've read a few people say that maybe it would have been better if it was binding, because they did start. I think that you're right about the Shipley thing, but I think there was also Labour started, football started getting kicked. It was too tempting. I think they set a band as well, or they wanted a band of a floor and a top. And it gave a bit much room for people to make promises. But, of course, Winston didn't agree, and he obviously, the smart populist politician that he is, who's very good at predicting these things and riding waves into government, saw a path into government for 96, didn't he? And he campaigns on getting rid of the surcharge and a compulsory super scheme like the one he talked about just a few weeks ago. And lo and behold, he gets into government. The surcharge is eventually gone, as you've alluded to with Jenny Shipley. She got rid of that. But let's have a listen, because he got his referendum. It was to be a referendum on compulsory super, which you also mentioned. Let's have a listen to an old mate of ours with an ad about that.
The voting paper is simple. The question asks, do you support the proposed compulsory retirement savings scheme? A tick in the top box means yes, bottom box, no. But a warning from Jenny Shipley. If the scheme goes ahead, it may be altered.
Look at Australia, 6 years into a compulsory scheme, hundreds of amendments since it was introduced. So I think it's wrong to say there won't be change with either scheme. There almost certainly will be change over time.
That was wrong there. It wasn't an ad. It was Duncan Garner doing
his... that would be for
story.
For One News, probably around 97, 98. And the interesting sort of... subtext to that was after Jenny Shipley had rolled Jim Bolger in late 97 and you're going into 1998, 99, the National Party were very upset that the various ructions in New Zealand First were sort of sucking out their oxygen, and they'd implanted Shipley really to sort of put New Zealand First back in its box. So, her sort of campaigning against the Winston Peters compulsory superannuation referendum question was sort of seen as a way to put him back in the box, and that was kind of politically where she was heading there at that point too.
Yeah, and it got absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, was it 90%?
Any guesses on the number?
Well, it was close to 90% against, I think.
Yeah, bang on, 92%.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a total and utter rejection. I think that, to be fair to Winston, Treasury sort of designed this compulsory scheme. They came up with it looked pretty complicated to me. Unions didn't like it. Business didn't like it. There was, I don't think he was up. He must have known pretty early on that it was going to be difficult. And then, of course, the surcharge was dropped, and so that was the end of that coalition government.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because that dissolved in August of 98. And that referendum must have been held outside an election too, which is kind of weird. I guess the other context for people about this, and we talked about it being a third rail issue and stuff, one of the things we haven't said, which it might be obvious to some people but maybe not to others, is that old people vote. They really do. Like, if you look at who votes in this country and you get to older New Zealanders, man, they turn out at the polls, 80, 90% of over 65-year-olds. I can't remember what the exact numbers are, but they vote, which means that any policy that affects them, you've got to, as a political party, really take notice of it, and which is possibly one of the reasons why this sector of our community has been looked after, right?
Yeah, no, totally. What did Jim Morrison sing in 5 to 1? The song, the Doors song. They got the guns, we got the numbers. He was singing about the fact that there's teenagers in the 70s. They were the baby boom. They had the numbers. Well, of course, that baby boom bulge that has gone right through. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I suppose, I think it obviously affected how Labour then went into 99. And I keep coming back to this idea that why. You look around the world, you look at Australia, look at early New Zealand, means testing wasn't controversial. It almost seemed as though in the early days of New Zealand pension it would have been more controversial not to have means testing.
Yes.
To allow really wealthy New Zealanders to get the super.
It seems bizarre.
It seems strange.
Yeah, and again, it was one of those hangover arguments that, means testing's too hard and it's too difficult and we might as well just have universality, which is where you give it to everyone because it's too complicated and you're just going to create too much work and it's not worth it. I mean, I would have thought too, in the days of AI, this argument surely has been completely demolished now, hasn't it? That it's somehow too difficult to work out who owns what and who earns what, and so you might as well just give it to everyone. I would have thought that is an argument that's difficult to sustain.
The Retirement Commissioner sort of gently raised it in a recent report, but it sort of sunk like a stone, I think, from memory. Didn't get much pick up or anything. I just think, I think the numbers are still, politicians still don't want to go there. And I thought, it was interesting to see, and so when Labour got into power in 99, they had a completely different approach, didn't they? They went, all right, first things first, we've got to deal with this bulge in the population. How are we going to deal with it? We come up with the Cullen Fund, the super fund, a sovereign wealth fund, like an entirely separate fund where we would take money from surpluses that the government is supposed to run apparently, and put it into a separate fund and invest it. And that's actually worked pretty well.
Yeah, it has. I mean, you'd be hard to find someone serious who doesn't think that was a good idea. Although that was tinkered with quite a bit too, wasn't it? I mean, I remember that when Bill English and John Key got in the GFC, they stopped making contributions to that super fund
for a long time.
Yeah, I think it was about $2 billion a year that they were supposed to be putting in, something around that. And was that right, roughly? And they said, nah, we're not going to do it because famously Bill English was saying, well, would you borrow to save? And it wasn't a bad argument, but I suppose we all do that to a degree, don't we? With our mortgages and things. But they suspended those contributions, didn't they?
They did. From what
years.
I can see, it was 2009, right, and it didn't come back until about 2017.
Yes, I think. I think Joyce probably as Stephen Joyce as finance minister after Bill English when John Key left and Bill English took over leadership, he might have made the first contribution again in that 2017 period, right?
I mean, there's a really complicated formula for how they make that contribution, but I think from what I can see, it started again in 2017. I think National now Nicola Willis remains committed, but the contributions are fairly small because the fund is big. It's up around $100 billion or getting near that mark, and starts paying out in 2031 maybe, or a little bit later there, but it changes depending on the forecasts of the government's books about when you need it and when you don't need it. So it's a very complicated system. Anyway, so that gets set up. That's just there to smooth over the bulge, right?
Yeah.
It's not there to pay everyone's super, is it? It's just to get through the bulge of the baby boomers.
Yeah, that's right. But it's, and you have to give it to Michael Cullen, the late Sir Michael Cullen. I mean, he had a big impact on New Zealand, didn't he?
Huge.
With working for families and in tandem with Jim Addington, the Kiwi Bank, I suppose, although he wasn't initially a fan. But yeah, most famously, as you say, with the Cullen Fund.
And then, in quite towards the end of that Labour term, he came up with a savings scheme, a savings scheme for everyone. It was not compulsory. Let's have a little listen to him talking about it. Everyone knows what it is now. They've probably got one, and they can probably see it on their phone.
So the KiwiSaver scheme is designed to give hundreds of thousands of ordinary New Zealanders the chance to save in a simple and effective and low-cost way through the workplace. It's a voluntary scheme, but it's an opt-out scheme rather than an opt-in scheme. This doesn't replace New Zealand superannuation, but it will enable very large numbers of people to save to add to New Zealand superannuation when they retire and to enjoy a higher standard of living.
Yeah.
Can you remember what the conditions were when it was pretty generous when it kicked off to get everyone in there?
Yes. Didn't you get $1,095 or something weird like that?
Yeah.
What was the number?
You got a one-off $1,000. There was a kickstart payment
of $1,000, right?
And then you got your tax credits as well.
Yeah.
So you could get a couple of grand early on.
But National axed that in the end, didn't they?
Yeah, it's been whittled right back. As conditions, and even in this last budget,
That's
wasn't it?
right.
They've reduced it back to $250 as the tax credit, but they have committed to increasing the amount, the compulsory amount, or the amount that you put into up to 4%, which is a good thing because ours is very low, the contribution rate compared to say Australia. So we're kind of going full circle there now, and we're finishing up. It's an interesting position because you've got Winston out there who's going to be campaigning on making KiwiSaver compulsory, along with somehow finding some tax cuts to pay to soften the blow.
That's the bit where he's never so good, is it? About actually giving us the numbers about how much that would actually cost. But there was some maths that said it would be many billions. So it is expensive. Yeah, if you were going to compensate by a tax cut.
Weirdly, given he had the 92% who slammed him in this referendum, I suspect he'd have more support now, would he?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
Because so many people are in KiwiSaver. I mean, we should say that there are a million. I think there's still a million who aren't, but there's 2 or 3 million who are, at least. I can't remember the exact number, but most New Zealanders end up in it and see the benefit.
Have you been looking at yours recently? Mine's been going bananas.
I often look at mine.
I've got mine on, but it got a hammering in the tariff when the tariffs when Trump was, but just recently it's been going up.
The US stock markets have had an incredible 6-week run, but I did note the UK central bank warning about the AI bubble bursting, and that is my grave fear. that and it's a real concern for New Zealand, I have to say, because if we're struggling to get into our recovery and we're slashing interest rates, and fingers crossed those orthodox tools do the job and people start spending and we get some growth because we need to get out of this cost of living crisis. You'd hate to get blindsided, wouldn't you, by an AI.com crash coming at you.
We'll have to look at AI on Context at some point.
We will. Hey, well, I think that's where we're going to have to leave it, but we've come full circle. Thank you very much for listening. That was Context for this week. We'll catch you again next week.